Hello everyone, I'm Kristina Gligoric. I'm a PhD student at EPFL, and I will present an update on our project called Monitoring, Modeling and Modifying Dietary Habits and Nutrition based on large-scale digital traces. Nutrition plays a key role in our daily lives and determines our long-term health, and the goal of our project is to use novel datasets of large-scale digital traces, such as transactional data, web search, social media, in order to monitor and model diets, quantify and correct biases stemming from the fact that digital traces don't necessarily capture food consumption. And then third, use these insights to modify habits in order to promote healthy and sustainable behavior. In line with these goals, I will first present our work where we study how formation of social ties influences food choice. In this work, we ask how are properties of food choice, healthiness, or the types of items consumed, affected by the choices of people that we eat with. And the motivation for studying these questions is the fact that for long it was suspected that social influence has a major impact on the food choice that we make. So think about parents, classmates, friends, partners, colleagues, and the complex ways in which their diet can impact ours. However, quantifying such complex influences is very challenging, and to date, most of the evidence comes from small-scale surveys or experiments that are limited in duration. Another great challenge is entanglement of homophily and influence. So for example, if we observe two friends who both eat very healthy, are they similar because they're friends and they influence each other, or did they become friends exactly because they're similar? In this study, we tried to provide some answers based on real-world data, and this paper is just out and it will be presented at CSCW conference in October. So in this work, we study anonymized transaction logs of purchases made at EPFL campus with the identifying badge, where similarly to other university or corporate campuses, students make purchases with rechargeable badges. And then since the data contains purchases made over 8 years, we do a longitudinal study where we observe anonymized persons making transactions, but we are still able to infer persons that are likely connected with a social tie based on their repeated proximity in restaurant queue. So they appear frequently next to each other, like in this image on the upper right many times. And then with the help of expert epidemiologists on our team, we annotated the sold items in terms of their healthiness, and we designed a matched quasi-experimental study based on incident user design to figure out the effect of forming a social tie. And let me describe what exactly that means. So the key idea behind the study design is the following. We observe two focal persons, focal person 1 and focal person 2, and they will be our comparison pair. They both don't have a regular eating partner, and they are indistinguishable from each other in terms of their pre-treatment purchases. And this is captured by a set of relevant features. So they are indistinguishable in terms of shops they typically buy from, time of the day, how healthy the items are, and so on. And then at a given moment, they both acquire a partner that they start to eat with regularly. So this can be someone that they met in a course that they're taking, for example, and this is the moment of tie formation. But the person 1 starts to eat with a healthy eating partner, while person 2 starts to eat with an unhealthy eating partner. And then we monitor purchases made by person 1 and person 2 in the post-treatment period, when they eat regularly with their partners. We can compare the healthiness of purchased food before and after tie formation for both person 1 and person 2 to get the difference between after and before tie formation. And then finally, we can calculate the difference in these differences to capture by how much focal persons diverge depending on the properties of the partners that they acquire. And this is the quantity that we are interested in. So in this way, this setup then lets us identify how healthiness of a person's food choice is affected by the healthiness of their partner's food choice. And the question that we are interested in is, do people modify their habits after starting to eat with someone? And if so, in what direction? And what kinds of items are purchased in modified quantities? We observe that matched persons do significantly diverge after tie formation, depending on partners' attributes, which is an evidence of social influence. Persons who start eating with a healthy eating partner purchase on average around 6 additional healthy items in the period following tie formation compared to the matched person who starts to eat with an unhealthy eating partner. And there is also a dose-response relationship in a sense that the more drastic the difference between partners is shown on the x-axis, the stronger the treatment effect will be on the y-axis. And then we can zoom in to understand what kinds of items are purchased in modified frequencies. So we can see that persons that start to eat with another one that has a healthy set of habits buys more coffee, more lunch meals, soups, fruits, dessert, tea, salads, and less of items that loosely form a cluster of unhealthy items that shouldn't be consumed in high frequencies, such as soft drinks, vending machines, sauces, pizza, kebab, compared to the matched focal person. And I wanted to highlight three key takeaways from this study. So the first one is that little is known about how passively sensed behavioral signals, such as purchase logs, can be used for understanding factors that govern food choice. And we tried to bridge that gap by analyzing large-scale and long-term purchase data. And that lets us derive insights that would otherwise be very challenging to derive. The second point is that these derived insights, they have the potential to support interventions that have the goal of encouraging more healthy and sustainable habits. And designing and also logistically executing such interventions is very challenging. And it is also challenging to predict their impact through experimentation because there are ethical concerns involved, as there can be also undesirable effects that are elicited. And then in this work, we show how observational insights based on passively sensed data can be used to evaluate the impact of interventions that occur naturally without experimentation. And then the third point is that even beyond food purchases on campus, this methodology where pairs of similar individuals are identified has the potential to allow detecting behavioral changes in other relevant social scenarios. So for example, in order to understand how behaviors or skills of one another are impacted in the context of exercise habits, coaching or counseling, traveling, sleeping, interacting online, and so on. Then next, I wanted to highlight a couple of promising directions we are currently pursuing in this space. So the first one is the follow-up of the work that I just described, where we zoom in into specific situations when people are eating together, as we suspect that one of the driving mechanisms of social influence is mimicry or copying, where a person is more likely to exhibit the same behavior of the person in front of them in the queue. And the beauty of this setup is that thanks to the outline of cafeterias at EPFL, when we look at transaction logs, we can reconstruct the queue in which students and staff line up to make food choice. And here you can see a couple of illustrations where cash registries, food choice, and the queue are shown. And then we are also exploring the role of genders and different statuses, students and staff, to figure out what individuals are most likely to influence each other, and also what is the role of the design of the layout of the restaurant, as this can have implications for deciding how food is offered in university environments and beyond university environments. The second direction that we are currently pursuing is about understanding the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on diets. So how did dietary interest shift during mobility restrictions, and what foods are people interested in more or less when they spend more time at home? And we think that understanding answers to these questions is very much of interest to us because lockdowns can be seen as population scale dietary interventions that incentivize people to consume more food at home. And then to get a sense of what happened, we rely on a curated set of Google Trends time series that lets us measure interest in concepts related to food. And then looking at overall interest in different foods in these early results, we can first see that across a number of studied countries, there are seasonal surges that coincide with holiday seasons. So for example, in US, there are two peaks, one for Thanksgiving and one for Christmas in both 2019 and 2020. And then second, we see drastic increases in food interest, in overall food interest, coinciding with mobility restrictions that occurred in March and April that are comparable in their amplitude to holiday season, which has major impact on health of populations. And then if we think about how we are accessing food along two axes, so we can consume food at home or outside of home, and we can prepare it ourselves or someone else can prepare it. We can measure the effect of reduced mobility on these different ways, on interest in these different ways of accessing food. And then we can see that there was an overall increase in interest in recipes, baking, groceries, so concepts related to preparing and consuming food at home. And there was an overall decrease in interest in restaurants, and these effects are stronger the more drastic mobility restrictions were in a given country. And then also studying the different types of foods, the biggest increases occur for calorie-dense processed carbohydrate-based foods such as bakery products, bread, pastry, pies, and we see overall smaller effects for fresh products such as fruits and vegetables. And we think that these drastic shifts in interest have potential to affect food consumption and health outcomes of people worldwide. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.